The wind came ashore like a host in full charge, banners streaming and hooves hammering the sea to white ruin. Eddard Stark drew his cloak tighter and let the salt sting his face, the taste of iron and brine reminding him of the north in winter when the snows blew inland off the bight and men leaned into the gale to reach home. Storm's End rose ahead on the far headland, a vast, pale drum of stone shouldered against the sky, its ancient walls sullen and immovable beneath the assault. The surf hammered the cliffs. Spray leapt like startled ghosts. Gulls wheeled and cried. Within that ring of walls slept old vows and older wrath. The story said Durin Godsgrief had defied the gods and that Brandon the Builder had tamed the wind with walls no storm could breach. Ned had seen many castles, but only two had felt like living arguments. Winterfell with its heart of hot springs, and this, where thunder cracked and found no door through which to step. He had not thought to see it again. The last time he had come this way, he had brought bread and salt and hope to a starving garrison and a young lord who had held his post with a jaw like a hinge of iron. Then the banners had been for Robert, and Stannis had opened the gate only after a count of oaths and loaves. That was a lifetime ago across which deaths marched. Brandon, Rickard, Jon Arryn, Lyanna, Robert. The living had dwindled like coals, scattered to ash by hands that called themselves fathers and brothers and friends. The men coming down the causeway to meet him wore green roses on their doublets and gilded thorns at their shoulders. The Reach had come to war arrayed for a tourney. Ned's escort, 3 riders out of the Riverlands, plain-faced men in plain mail, fell back when the flowered lords drew near, hands near sword belts by reflex. Ned let his horse stand easy and remembered Robert's barrel laughter when he told the tale of breaking the siege. He remembered, too, the stink of the black cells lying coiled like a snake in his bones. "Lord Stark," said the foremost of the flowery riders, a young man with a gold-stitched collar and carefully curled hair. "Lord Renly invites you to his pavilion. All courtesy is commanded."
Ned nodded.
Courtesy cost less than men's lives, though not always enough less. He guided his horse along the road that climbed from the sea toward the great encampment spread like a garden in bloom. Pavilions of green and gold and white sprang up in ordered avenues. Cooks were stewing meat. Armorers' hammers rang out. A smell of oats and horses and oiled leather took hold and banished the sea's sharp edge. Men laughed easily here. The sound was as strange as a bell in a graveyard. Renly's pavilion stood amid a ring of fruit-laden carts and perfumed hedges cut from the green satin of banners, a mock orchard raised out of cloth and paint. The flap opened to reveal the young king seated in a high-backed chair, as if a throne had been called from thin air and obeyed. He wore a cloak deep as midsummer leaves, and a crown of antlers circled his dark hair. He was Robert renewed, more handsome and less heavy, the old joy without the old scars. He stood at once, smiling, and the room seemed to draw near him as moths do to a candle. "Lord of Winterfell," he said, "unless you've changed your mind and come to claim mine." Ned eased his sore leg and bowed just enough. "Storm's End remembers me too well to give me your seat. Your grace." Renly's smile sharpened and gentled in the space of a breath. He had a way of making a jest without cutting. Robert had cut with laughter and called it mending. Renly mended with laughter and called it cutting. "I have had you watched since word came from Riverrun," he said lightly. "Rumor sails faster than Carrick's. Half my lord swore you had been beheaded. The other half swore you commanded ghosts along the Trident. Rumor is a poor bannerman." Ned let his eyes find the other people in the pavilion. A girl in a pale green dress stood beside Renly's chair, pretty as a drawing, her hair like spring wheat and her mouth prudent. Her eyes were not a girl's eyes. The rose pinned at her breast was smaller than those he had seen outside. Its petals were of emeralds. On the other side of the chair stood a young knight whose beauty would have seemed carved if not for the quick anger flickering across it. A living statue with a hand on the pommel of his sword and love on his sleeve. Beyond them, a tall woman in plain blue held herself straight, big-boned and severe, her face both awkward and stubbornly calm. She wore a golden cloak striped in colors like a lord's surcoat, and the set of her mouth said she had learned how not to be laughed at by letting laughter break on her like waves break on stone. "Lady Marjorie Tyrell," Renly said with courtly flourish. My queen, Ser Loras Tyrell, my brother by marriage and my shield against tedium. And this is Brienne of Tarth, one of my rainbow guard. I had heard, Ned said. The sapphire Isle breeds loyalty in hard shapes. He inclined his head to Marjorie. My lady, your grace, Loras corrected with silk. His fingers traced the outline of the hilt as a harpist might test a string. She will be your grace when the realm is mended, Renly said, a shade too lightly. And until then? Ned asked. Until then, we are mending it. Renly gestured to cushions. Sit, eat. You have ridden far, unless those are rivers clinging to your boots. They brought figs and a thick yellow cheese and small crusts slick with honey. Ned took none. His hunger was a quiet wolf that did not trust what it was offered. Renly watched him with amusement, then waved away servants and courtiers until only the queen, the Knight of Flowers, the Woman of Tarth, and 2 guards remained. You are the first man, Renly said, to ride openly into my camp from the river lords and speak to me without also speaking at me. The Tullis are courteous. The Freys are many. The Malisters are proud. The Blackwoods are dour. The Brackens are loud. None of them bring me what I need. You may. I bring no army, Ned said, nor a crown. You bring a name that opens gates, Renly said. If I march to King's Landing, and I mean to, I would rather the north be a road we travel than a wall we batter. Your son is winning glory in the Riverlands. I have not declared against him. The Reach has no need to trample grain that grows so far from its kitchens. My son rides to bring my daughters home, Ned said. Renly spread his hands. Good, bring them home. I have no use for Joffrey's cruelty or Cersei's lies. Yours would be a simpler realm, Lord Stark, if you would allow me to be your king. Your brother Stannis is elder, Ned said. Loras laughed, short and contemptuous. Stannis is stone with a sword. Ask the men who followed him at Storm's End while the Tyrells starved him. Ask if stone makes a king. Stone stands, Brienne said before she could stop herself. Her voice filled the pavilion like a blade drawn without flourish. And falls upon the foot that kicks it, Marjorie said, mild as cream. My husband is the realm's hope, Lord Stark. Stannis will never win the hearts of men. My lord husband already has them. Why should the realm prefer a bitter draught to fine wine? Because law is not wine, Ned said. And because law that bends for liking breaks for fear. He watched Renly's face. The likeness to Robert was most dangerous when Renly grinned with boyish mischief. It was most compelling when he listened. I have asked to speak with Stannis, Renly said. He will meet me tomorrow at dawn. He requires conditions as if we were haggling for fish on the pier. I have agreed to half of them. He will not agree to me. He will not, Ned said. Yet you may agree to him. Renly's smile thinned. I expected a colder man. I am cold enough to count. I count dead men easily. If you fight here, 500 will die because they overslept or because their horse stumbled, and 5,000 will die because they followed orders, and 5 men will die because they sought a name and found a knife. You will win because you have the Reach at your back, and you will lose because you will have killed your brother before you have killed your enemies. In victory, you will have sown a royal field where only grudges grow. Renly's fingers drummed his chair's carved arm. Loras's mouth hardened. Marjorie watched Ned like a weaver regarding a shuttle's path. Brienne's blue eyes flickered, and Ned recognized the look. Men of the north wore it when the springs thawed and the river ice cracked loud enough to wake the wolves. If I yield to Stannis, Renly said at last, the kingdom gets exactly what it does not want, and all the lords who have sworn me will find themselves with a bitter taste and a sore pride. You ask me to undo work that cannot be easily done again. I ask you to speak with your brother as if you meant to live with him in the same realm, Ned said. I ask you to decide whether the realm is a chair or a house. A chair takes one. A house takes many and keeps them from the rain. You speak like a maester. I've been told worse. Renly's laughter was true then. Very well. At dawn I'll hear Stannis and bear your counsel in mind. Will you stand with me when I go? I will stand near you, and I ask one thing before dawn. Name it. Keep the torches burning. All of them, more than you think you need. Set braziers outside your tent. Stretch oilcloths above them to keep the wind from snuffing the flames. Renly looked amused again. I do not fear the dark. Ned's mouth went dry as old bread. Be wary of shadows that come where a man is and leave no footprints when they go. The queen's gaze sharpened. Loras frowned as if the world had mispronounced his name. Brienne's hand flexed on her belt. Renly leaned forward, bright, curious. Has the North learned new superstitions? The North has learned old truths, Ned said, and thought of a tower at the edge of the world and a sword with a name he could not bear to speak and a bed that had smelled of blood and wildflowers. Humor an old soldier. Done, Renly said. At dawn, the sky was broken glass and pearl. The parley took place on a scrubbed patch of earth, a bowshot from the outer line of Renly's pavilions, under a plain canvas stretched so the rain could choose someone else to fall upon. Stannis came with a handful of men. They wore a stag crowned in crimson on black. The queen's new god seemed to have eaten the old colors and spat them out darker. Stannis's face was leaner than Ned remembered, drawn tight like a hide stretched on a frame. Only his eyes were the same, gray as cold steel, as if someone had sheathed winter there. Davos Seaworth walked at his shoulder and looked at Ned with recognition and a quick, respectful dip of the head. Ned inclined his head back. They had met at White Harbor years ago when Salt and Custom had carried Davos's smuggling hands into honest trade, though honest men in Westeros often wore old names like anchors. Brother, Renly said, as if it were an old joke no one had spoiled. Renly, Stannis answered, as if names were tools to be used and put away. The talk was old as kingdoms. Law and right, love and ease. Stannis spoke of order as if it were a coin he had minted himself and rightful, as if the word were armor. Renly spoke of peace and plenty and how men follow strength because kingship without followers is only a man alone in a crown. When the word incest came out of the air like a thrown stone, Renly caught it and weighed it and smiled. Stannis did not smile. Joffrey is not Robert's son, Ned said plainly, when it seemed no sentence would be born that was not a cousin to another. The book Jon Arryn died for proves the seed and the flower were mismatched in every branch. The mother is the queen. The father is the queen's brother. The hand who replaced me knows this and uses it. He gave the tale like a man laying a sword on a table. Roberts will named you protector, Lord Stannis. I sent letters. The city answers to Lannister gold and Lannister knives. The realm teeters because a boy sits where a king should stand. Boy or bastard, Renly said. The throne is not a chair for grief and figures. The realm needs a king who can hold it. The realm needs truth, Stannis said. The realm needs both, Ned said. And both of you. Silence for a breath or 10. The wind tugged the canvas like a child. Davos's eyes flicked toward the sea, as if some small part of him forever measured tide and weather and the chance of open water. I will not bend to you, Stannis said, not raising his voice. I am the elder. The law is clear. The matter is plain. If I yield, I teach the realm that a king can be talked out of the king's seat. That lesson will be used again, sooner and worse, to the ruin of my daughter's children. And if I yield, Renly said, I teach another lesson, that men should not love a king or trust him, for he'll throw their love back in their faces to please a parchment. My oath is to the living, not to the dead. Your oath is to your king, Stannis said. Which I intend to be, Renly said cheerfully. A smile ghosted across Davos's mouth. He choked it dead at once. Ned watched the two Baratheons, the elder with a face cut from iron, the younger with a face lit as a festival, each of them a piece of Robert without the other pieces. The realm had been barely healed by the work of both Stark and Arryn in Robert's wake. It would not survive two kings while the Lannisters kept count of bodies and coin. There is a road, Ned said. It runs between pride and defeat. Take King's Landing first, together, and raise a great council. Let the realm's lords weigh law and love in the same scales. If the council chooses Stannis, let the Reach and Storm lords be honored and thanked in more than words. If the council chooses Renly, let the North and Dragonstone have the security of oaths binding what has been proclaimed. The law is not to be voted on, Stannis said. The realm must be persuaded to live with the law, Ned said. Renly's eyes shone. I have always liked the notion of a great council. People do so enjoy gatherings. Stannis stared as if at a fish that had learned to sing. You would throw the kingship to chance. I would pull it out of a pit, Ned said. Will you take each other's word and let men live to take up plows again? Or will you seek justice by scything down the field that feeds you? Stannis looked at him, and in that flinty gaze Ned saw recognition. Stannis remembered him at Storm's End, counting loaves and oaths. He remembered that honor could be a ledger. If I agree to take King's Landing first and name no king until a council sits, Stannis said slowly, will you, Lord Stark, bring the North to it? The North will not be commanded, Ned said, but it will be led. Renly spread his hands. A truce on the grounds of our father's house is pleasing. Tell me, brother, if I am to sit the Iron Throne only after a vote, will you sit it after a vote? I will sit it when the law seats me, Stannis said. If it does not, I will abide. Marjorie said nothing. Loras made a sound like a sheath catching a blade by accident. Brienne's face did not change, but her shoulders loosened. Davos breathed out as if he had been holding his breath since he was born. They broke apart with 100 particulars to be hammered. Messengers to ride under banners white as gulls, foraging lines to be drawn like ointment along a wound, oaths written as carefully as hand could form letters. Renly, in high humor, took a peach from a platter a servant nervously offered and bit into it with a dramatist's relish. Juice ran down his wrist in a bright ribbon. Brother, he said, offering the peach, take a taste of the peace we have made. Stannis looked at the fruit as if it were a herald with the wrong colors and let his gaze move past it to the sea. I have work, he said. You always feed on work, Renly said, and bit again. That night the wind veered east and grew teeth. Ned walked the avenues of tents with a torch in his hand until the knuckles of his fingers ached. He had sent men he trusted to each great pavilion with orders to keep the fires up and the lamplight high. He did not know what could be kept out with flame. He only remembered a room in the Red Keep where darkness had sat in corners like waiting men and a whisperer had told him how kings fell, and before that a cold night in a tower where shadows had moved like the thoughts of dying men. He did not name any dread, but he moved as a man who has named one and is determined to show it less respect than it is due. He found Brienne at her post outside Renly's pavilion, her shoulders set as if they were keeping the canvas upright by force. She looked at his torch and then at him. You think fire is needed, she said. He nodded. Shadows hide among shadows. You speak as if you have seen the dark alive. I have seen men make it so. He lifted the torch to the oilcloth canopy he had ordered strung above the ring of braziers. The cloth bellied under the gusts and kept the flames from being smothered. Renly had laughed at the fuss, but he had allowed the guard to be doubled, and 2 braziers smoked just inside the tent as well. Brienne's gaze was steady. I will not fail him. I believe you. He looked past her to the slit of light spilling beneath the pavilion's flap. Has he retired? He and Ser Loras and the Queen have played at Sivas and spoken of banners. He is happy. He thinks we will ride on King's Landing within a fortnight. Let him be happy, Ned said. Let him live to be less happy later. When the thing came, it came like exhaustion. Ned had moved a dozen paces down the path, the torch's smoke biting his eyes, when a coldness slid into the camp that was not made of weather. The hairs along his neck rose. His mouth filled with a taste like copper coins. He turned back toward the pavilion. The torch guttered sideways in an eddy that did not belong to the wind. From nowhere and everywhere the shadow crept, not cast by any man or brazier, but coalescing, drawn by the tense heart as if it fed on breath. It pooled along the ground like spilt ink, rose like smoke, and took a suggestion of shape, something of the slope of a man's shoulders, the long face of a stern lord. The more the braziers flared, the more it seemed to thicken, as if the fire called its cousin from some other plane. Fire! Ned shouted, and Brienne had her sword out before the word was full. She interposed herself between the shadow and the tense flap with the same awkward grace he had seen in mountain stags surprised by winter, huge, sure, unpretty. The shadow flowed around her blade like water around a pilaster and reached for the canvas. Ned flung the torch under the oilcloth and into the nearer brazier. The flames shouldered up, greedy for air. "Cut it!" he shouted. "Let the light in." He seized at the stay ropes, slashed with his dagger, and the pavilion's skin shuddered. The shadow paused, as if deciding whether canvas was a kind of night. Brienne hacked, not at the shadow but at the cords. Loras burst from the flap with bare blade and bare chest, eyes wild, and the queen cried out behind him in a voice that did not break. The tense roof tore. Wind rammed in and light came with it. The gray of a clouded moon, the forked white of lightning far at sea, the yellow of the overstrained braziers. The shadow flinched, if shadows can flinch, and checked like smoke caught in a contrary draft. It lunged. Brienne met it as if meeting a boar. Her sword passed through it without biting, yet the thing recoiled. The way fog recoils when a ship's bow cleaves it and leaves a troubled wake. Loras leapt and slashed in the same useless arc. His blade hissed like a whisper within a whisper. The shadow gathered, lengthened its arm, and reached for Renly, who stood behind the two of them with his hand on Marjorie's shoulder. Lips parted not in fear but astonishment, as if a jest had taken solid shape. Ned seized the second brazier by its iron rim and dragged it, cursing as heat burned through glove and callus. He upended it. Coals spilled in a dark cataract, flaring when they struck spilled oil. Fire crawled the rug like a lazy beast suddenly awake. Flame leapt up in a curtain. The shadow shrank away from the sheet of light as if there were more substance to brightness than there was to steel. It skittered back, then to the side, seeking a seam. It found the tent's rear, where the light was less plentiful and pressed thin, and in a breath would have made itself a knife and found Renly's ribs. Brienne threw her heavy body through the brazier that Ned had abandoned, seized it by a leg, and slid across coals with sparks biting her cloak. She yanked it sideways, and the legs screamed on the trampled ground. The coals in the pan surged glossy and red. She heaved, and the brazier toppled where the shadow hunted shade. Fire spilled. Fire met not shadow and laid upon it like hands. The thing writhed, faceless, and Ned smelled something like burnt hair and damp earth. He lifted his dagger and drove it into the heart of the rearing shape in the same useless gesture that sent him backward into memory. A white blade catching dawn, a man kneeling with blue eyes like a winter sky. The dagger passed through. The shadow spasmed anyway and went thin as a sigh. Then it was gone, not as smoke goes, but as a thought goes when a bell tolls and will not let the ear keep it. Silence came in the space after a drumbeat. The rain outside had paused, and only the hiss of quenched coals spoke. Renly stared at the place where death had begun to be, and then at Ned Stark as if he, too, had taken a shape from darkness. "It had my brother's face," he said quietly. "It was your brother's sin," Loras hissed. "He will pay." "No," Renly said. "He will answer. That is different." Marjorie's hand left his shoulder. "We will not bicker. The men will have heard shouting." Brienne's cloak smoked. She stood very still, her sword point down, breathing the way men breathe when they have been beneath water too long and come up to find the air still there. Ned went to the tent flap and nodded to the guards. "Double the fires," he said roughly, "and fetch the captains of guard. No man is to stand alone in the dark." He looked back to Renly. "Your Grace, my counsel is this. At first light, we take boats and ride the coast under the castle. There is a cave below the walls, a postern from the time when men believed that water would sell its secrets to a man with patience enough. If shadows can be born, they can be born, and whoever bears them has feet and needs a boat." Brienne turned her head. "There are caves. On Tarth, the tides cut the cliffs each year. The same water bites these capes. I have hunted gull nests there when I was a girl. There is a landing in rough seas where an oarsman with strong arms can make a haunt." Renly's laugh came back to him like a coin when tossed and caught. "Gods forgive me," he said mildly, But I love a plan made of rocks and ropes. Ser Loras, wake Lord Bryce. Wake Lord Karen. Brienne, choose 10 of your guard who will not fall into the sea. Lord Stark, will you row with me? I will, Ned said. At dawn the sea was a sullen beast rolling in its sleep. Ned remembered rowing a skiff on the long lake as a boy under a sky so clear it seemed the gods had polished it. This was not that. The oars were heavier, the water colder, the rhythm drunk on wind and spray. Brienne knelt at the bow as if she mistrusted boats and needed to keep the prow from mischief by personal glare. Renly rowed the way he did everything, joyfully, as if every labor were a chance to prove to the world that he was alive. Behind them came 2 more boats under ladders wrapped in rough cloth so they would not clatter against the rock, and behind those, in the gray, a 4th boat with men who moved like friends to silence. The cave's mouth showed itself only when a swell departed and a band of black slid low along the cliff. Brienne turned them into it with a few curt motions of the oar and leaned back, letting the water take them. The world narrowed at once to a throat of stone. The oars clicked against the walls with a sound like teeth. Water slapped and sucked. It smelled of old secrets and salt and something that might have been blood a very long time ago. They pulled. They slid. They became part of breath and tide. Far ahead, a candle winked, then hid, then winked again as the passage bent. Ned touched Renly's oar and stopped him with a glance. The candle bobbed once more. Davos knew the sea, and the sea had delivered him here as surely as a faithful hound leads a blind man home. There would be no one else with him but the woman in red. She did not like men about, by all accounts. Brave Talk said she did not need them. Ned believed that every omen had a seam that could be picked. They came to a shelf of rough stone where the cave widened like a mouth ready to spit. The candle stood in a niche. It shed yellow on the face of a man who turned toward them with eyes that saw too much and a hand that went to an empty scabbard. Davos's fingers closed and opened. For half a breath, he looked only at the woman beside him. Melisandre's red silk had no place here, but she wore it as a banner all the same, and the light from her own lamp licked along the line of her throat like an obedient tongue. Her eyes were pools that reflected a fire Ned could not see. Ser Davos? Ned said softly, as if they had met in a tavern and not a throat. Lord Stark, Davos answered. His mouth moved around the name like a ship around a sandbar. You look less dead than I was told. Not by much. Ned rose as far as the skiff would allow. I have come to stop a murder. You are late, Melisandre said, and smiled with no warmth at all. To stop the first, too late. To stop the second, maybe. Renly stepped ashore and water leapt at his boots. He looked at her as men look at a fire that warms and threatens both. My lady, he said pleasantly, we are to be kin if the realm keeps to any kind of sense. I would rather not begin our relationship with chains. The red woman's look barely touched him. She watched Ned as if he were a page written in a language she did not speak but wanted to learn. There are truths like stone, she said. There are truths like smoke. Only the blind man thinks one is all the world. Blind men wear their ears thin listening for the footstep that kills them, Ned said. Ser Davos, do not make enemies who can be friends. The realm cannot afford you to be foolish for the sake of a god you did not ask for. Davos's eyes flicked. I asked for bread once and got a title to pay for it. It's a thing to learn that gifts cost more than hunger. Walk away with me, Ned said. Come and tell Stannis what we have seen. That shadows can murder and be burned away again. Tell him we will take the city together and let the realm speak. That is work a man can feed his sons on. Melisandre laughed. It was not a woman's laugh. A realm is not a hearth, Lord Stark, she said. It is a hill of skulls. Renly's hand had gone to his sword, and the set of his mouth said he would draw if anything moved that was not meant to. Brienne stood behind him, a bulk of blue that blocked the tunnel and the small boatlight like a wedge. Lady, she said evenly to Melisandre, you will stay where you are. The red woman turned her head and held Brienne in her gaze long enough to be insolent. You have a sword and only a sword, she said. I have a god and 10 shadows. It seems one shadow failed. Renly said, and his smile showed teeth. Perhaps you count like a maester. Melisandre's eyes flicked to him. You are the younger son of a storm, she said, voice low like distant thunder. You were born from a woman who loved a man fit to be a king and a god who was not. Your life has been the fruit of lesser unions. Today you breathe because the old stones were woken to light. Light is not yours. It is given. It is taken. Ned had no patience left for divination. He moved before she could take her breath into a curse. Brienne's long arm was quicker. In a single stride, she seized Melisandre's lamp and dashed it against the cave wall. Darkness fell. The cave zone without lamp or god, and men gasped softly. But Brienne had also caught the Red Woman's wrists. Loras was there a heartbeat later, and 3 of the Rainbow Guard pinned the priestess between rock and the fact of their weight. Davos did not draw. He could not, having no sword, but beyond that, he did not. He watched with a sailor's calculation as if tides were in play here too, and he would choose a channel before his keel struck stone. Ser Davos, Ned said in the dark, walk out of this cave with me. Stannis will call you traitor in one breath and rely on you in the next. He will take his counsel from you because you have no reason to flatter him. Davos's teeth flashed, then hid. You are a strange man to tell truths, Lord Stark. I have been told worse. They took the Red Woman alive. She went like something wrapped in coals. Even in the dark, she radiated a feverish warmth. Brienne bound her hands with a thick cord. No shadow came. When they pushed back into the morning, the sea washed its own mouth and gulls scolded as if men had fouled their nest with trouble again. Renly stood in the surf up to his calves and watched the prisoners put ashore. He looked toward the headland where Storm's End sat like a clenched fist. We will have to choose a place to keep her, he said, and men who will not be turned. Ned thought of the old stories. In the castle, if the old tales are true, whatever ward sits in those stones, it is not friendly to new sorceries. Brienne, silent since they left the cave, nodded once. The walls do not like the wind, she said, which in her mouth was a poem. They brought Melisandre beneath the huge curve of Storm's End's keep and watched her eyes narrow as if the light there pained her. Some said the great tower hummed on the worst nights. Ned thought he heard a very old insistence in the stone, like a lesson repeated to a stubborn child. Stannis received them in a field tent pitched with a precision that marked Davos's hands, even if he now stood prisoner at its door. Stannis's jaw worked as he listened to the tale. At the sight of the Red Woman with her hands bound, his eyes moved, a sign more telling than shouts. He looked at Renly last. You were nearly murdered, Stannis said finally. I was nearly murdered, Renly agreed. He said it lightly, but there was something in it now that had not been there the day before, a thread of iron among the velvet. I have you to thank for calling such counsel to your side. Stannis looked at Melisandre. Lady, have you answers? My king, she said, and the title went through the tent like a thrown stone, hitting the men in subtle places. If you wish to plow a field with a jewel, you may. It will glitter. It will not turn earth. The Lord of Light gave me a gift. You will take it. You will call it theft. That is the way of men who fear their own shadows. Do not speak of shadows, Renly said softly. Stannis's mouth thinned. I have made errors. I will unmake them. You cannot, she said with something like pity. You can only choose new ones. I will unmake them, Stannis repeated. He turned to Ned. The counsel you propose is a remedy for a sickness we bred with pride. I do not stomach it, but I cannot cure the realm by feeding it more disease. I will hold with my brother until King's Landing is taken and let the lords choose. The Red Woman will be held. Ser Davos. His eyes flicked toward the smuggler. You will carry messages but not leave the lines without my word. Davos bowed a fraction and looked relieved to have a place to set his weight. Renly's brows twitched upward at the word brother, as if he expected the tent to shudder at the unusual strain. Good, Ned said, because he could not summon something graceful and because simple words are often truer than clever ones. We will ride soon. They rode. The host that gathered south of the Blackwater was like a moving city. From the steppe above the river, it seemed as if the earth had grown banners. The Tyrell knights marched with music that made men want to drink. The Storm Lords sang as if they were preparing for a wedding. The Dragonstone men moved in grim ranks, their helms crested with antlers painted black. Scouts came and went like gnats. Raven flights spun in and out of the tents with wings like slaps. Tyrion Lannister, within the city, had not been idle. Wildfire brewed in the alchemist's dens. Chains were forged in secret under lamplight. Catapults groaned as if each had gout. Ned knew none of the particulars, but he had learned to assume the enemy was never stupid and always hungry. At night he dreamed of Winterfell and woke to green tents and heat that lay heavy as a cat in his chest. He wrote a letter to Robb and burned it because the words found no way to be both father and commander. He dreamed of the girls with their mother's hair and woke and sharpened his sword and prayed to the gods in a whisper that was more habit than comfort. Sometimes he dreamed of the Tower of Joy, and there was no waking that lifted the iron. When the fleet moved, it moved like a toy in the hand of a cruel child. Triremes and cogs and longships beat toward the mouth of the river, oars flashing like fish. On their decks men stood arrayed, proud in the way men are when they are far from dying. Davos commanded the vanguard. Stannis had insisted on it, and Renly had smiled and nodded as if he had proposed it first. Ned watched from the shore with Renly and Brienne and 100 lords, and he felt the wrongness a second before the green came. Wildfire is not fire. It is something that wants to be remembered. When the first ship blew apart, the sound arrived ahead of the light, a colossal bellow that made the horse beside Ned rear and scream. The harbor became a field of green blossoms. Flames ran across water like dancers with long skirts. Men burned like rags. Men leapt and sank and rose again with no skin. A chain rose from the river like a snake called by piping. Trapped ships bucked and tore. The men on the banks shouted and did not hear their own voices. Renly's face went white, then red. "We were fools," he said. "We let them build a city out of fire while we argued about names." Stannis said nothing. He had ridden with them to watch his fleet shatter and his hope burn. Ned felt the old iron inside him ring. "Davos knew this could be," he said. "He told you to spread your ships and to sound the river first. He said a net is only a net when fish are too eager for bait." "He did," Stannis said. "I listened and did not hear." "Then hear this. The river is their teeth," Ned said. "We are their throat. We take the walls while they feed. We open the mud gate from the inside before the green dies." Renly turned in the saddle, alive again in the way men are when death stands across the field and points. "Brienne, blue cloak with me. Ser Garland, take the Thorn Company along the river lanes. Break any line not wearing your colors. Lord Stark, take 200 men who can move like smoke. If we do not have that gate, I will be throwing roses into a furnace by nightfall." There was nothing noble in the lanes along the river, only fish stink and slops and men who did not want war to come to their doors. Brienne moved like a hammer through a field of glass. Nothing stopped her for long. Ned went with men who had served with him in years when he could still climb a wall without his leg protesting. The mud gate loomed ahead with its ugly promise. The Lannister guards there were busy watching the fire show in the river. Men are poor watchers when marvels begin. Ned's men came up beneath the battlement with grapnels and hooks. Ropes kissed stone. The first of them climbed with a grace that made Ned's bones ache with old envy. He followed because there is no order sharper than example. The wall was a harsh palm under his hands, the rope a living thing that bit his skin. A bolt hissed past his ear. A man on the parapet shouted and became silence when an arrow took his throat. Ned hauled himself over with a grunt that drew blood from his bitten lip. He landed and rolled, and the world became noise and steel and ugliness. The smell was salt and iron. The sky above the Merlins was both green and gray. He moved the way a memory moves, a man shaped by old habits. When he had a heartbeat to think, he thought of Robb and of Sansa left too long in a court where men sharpened smiles, and he went forward again. They took the gate. The great bar fell with a boom like a drum. The hinges shuddered. Men screamed in triumph and fear, mostly fear. Ned found the line that hauled the gate's mouth upward and put his shoulder to it until his body was a confusion of protest and refuse. Then he heard the river's voice differ, and the flood of men came. The Storm Lords first, with antlers painted on their shields, then the Reach with their clean faces and real swords. Brienne came through amid them, as awkward in victory as she was in anything else, and Ned had a moment to be grateful for honesty that did not rehearse itself. Tyrion Lannister had built clever fires and better walls. He cajoled and threatened and led. He took an axe and an escort and went where the short man in a high place must go. Ned did not see him. He saw instead the effect of him. Defenders stiffening, order among men who wanted to run. The Hound fled the fire as dogs flee thunder, his fear honest and ugly. Joffrey, pulled from the battlements to see to the safety of the king, screamed petulance and terror in the same breath and was carried away by men who would later boast they had saved the king's life. In the keep, Cersei laughed too much and drank too much and told Sansa that men are dogs that bite whatever hand is nearest when they are frightened. Sansa held a cup and kept her eyes down and prayed to a tree that lived in a place she had not seen since the snow had fallen a year ago. When the doors shook and a breath of outside came under them, it felt like a long drink of water after a fever dream. Sandor Clegane came to Sansa's chamber by habit. He had not examined and found her ready to go with a bundle of clothes and her hands folded in front of her like a girl waiting for a dance. "You must be as mad as your father," he said, and then he was shocked to find that he was pleased the idea had made his mouth try to be kind. "Stay close," he growled, and took her downstairs that had not been built with kindness in mind. Ned met them in a corridor that smelled of torch pitch and ashes beneath the great tower where the Hand had his rooms. For an instant he saw only a tall black dog and a flash of red gold hair, and his throat forgot how to be a throat. Sansa's eyes went so wide that the world had to bend to fit in them. She stopped, and the Hound stopped because stopping was what he did best. He stopped pity and love and all the lovely lies men told, so he could stop for a man who came toward him with a face that had been supposed to be dead. "Father," Sansa said, and made it 2 syllables, one old as H, her bones and one new as her lungs. He folded her into him the way a man folds into a cloak against cold that thinks it owns him. The Hound watched with a face that had nothing to say and looked away when he noticed that his mouth had begun to say it anyway. A roar went up from the yard like a lion dying or being born. Cersei's voice carried down the steps, too shrill. "You fools! You absolute. And then a slap and then a laughter that sounded like coins falling and being picked up. "Come," Ned said into his daughter's hair. "We are not finished." They were, after a long time. The green fires guttered and the gray fires took over and the day failed. Men stacked bodies and spoke of them by numbers because tallies are easier than names. The red keep's gates opened to the colors of storm and leaf and iron, and the great tower gave up its pretenders. Cersei was seized. She walked like a woman who had arranged her own capture. Joffrey shrieked and kicked and said the word king, as if it could be made true by being said. Tyrion Lannister bled from a wound to his head and said clever things through teeth that were pink, and Shae watched him with eyes that weighed love and wage. Sansa held her father's hand and walked where he led and did not look back. On the 3rd day they called a council in the throne room. The Iron Throne looked silly with no one on it, like a chair that had dressed for a feast and found itself alone with old bones. The hall filled with lords whose banners would have made a painter mad. The air filled with talk. Stannis stood with a face like dawn's cold. Renly looked as if he had discovered a new game. The Tyrells occupied a bank like a garden come to court. Mace flushed with good health, Willis politely grave, Garland disposed to charm. Loras stood near Renly as if near a hearth. The river lords came with weather in their faces and satisfaction in their boots. The north was not there in banners, but it was there in the man who had dragged himself over a wall the day before and had not spoken a lie since his father had told him not to. Ned stepped forward when the hall's murmur found a rhythm to march to. He spoke of Jon Arryn and of a book that had lost the page where men believed lust could be disguised as lineage. He spoke of children killed because they were born on the wrong side of a bed. He did not speak of all the children he had failed. Varys watched with hands folded, and Littlefinger smiled with his mouth and not his eyes. Stannis gave the tale of blood and flower that the seed makes true or false. Tyrion, head bandaged, added half a jest about beards and bastards that made the hall breathe again when it thought it could not. Renly offered charm like a treat to a scolded hound. When it was done, they argued. The law is a hungry beast that feeds best when there is meat and no argument about seasoning. The Reach wanted sun and safety and a queen whose hair would look beautiful on coins. The Storm Lords wanted honor that did not have to be explained twice. The River Lords wanted the Lannisters broken like rotten cartwheels. The North wanted its daughters home and quiet winters with enough grain. Men who had not ridden as hard as others spoke louder than they had a right to. That is the way of such rooms. In the end, the shape of the realm took the shape of the men who meant to live in it. The Great Council was named and sworn to on paper and on swords. Ravens flew. The hall emptied slowly, like a tide drawing out. That night Ned sat with Sansa in a chamber that had held tears before and would again. She ate with a resolute neatness he recognized from Catelyn when Catelyn had been furious but had decided to be a lady first. "Arya?" Sansa asked finally. "She is safe," he said. If safety was a road with holes, he would not name the holes. "She is north with Yoren." Sansa's mouth quivered then steadied. "I thought you were dead," she said. "So did I," Ned said. "So did many who preferred it." They spoke of small things. The way bread in King's Landing tasted of ash. The way the green fire had looked like a dream of grass that wished to kill. The way girls listened at court. How careful one must be when gossip wears a kind face. He told her nothing of shadows or old towers. There are things a father will not lay on his daughter's shoulders even when the world would. Renly came to him late, after the household had gone to a tired sleep. He stood in the doorway and looked less like Robert than he had in months. "We will have our council," he said. "You have what you wanted. I have what I asked for," Ned said. "What I wanted died in a bed of blood and blue flowers long ago." Renly came in and sat, laying aside his antlered crown as if it were a ram's horns he wore for laughter at harvest. "Stannis will be crowned," he said, very calm. "Do you see that future?" "I see it. I feel it like a splinter under a nail. The lords will talk of law as if law were their mother. They will prefer his elder birth to my younger smile. The Tyrells will frown and revise their poems." Ned studied him. "Will you yield?" Renly grinned a little, but it was the sort of grin that men give when they have tasted vinegar. "I will abide," he said. "Because I swore to abide and because I am not a fool. We have thrown down the worst of our enemies. I do not mean to light my brother on fire and call it a candle." "You did not light him before," Ned said quietly, and Renly's eyes shuddered briefly in acknowledgement of the cave and the woman bound in the castle. "The realm will be dour under him," Renly said. "It will be steadier. He will count grain and spears and measure roofs before rain. Marjorie will not be queen." "What Marjorie will be," Ned said, "is untethered to a man whose crown would have made her a target for arrows and songs. She will be alive and loved by her brothers and father. That is no small thing." Renly breathed out a laugh and then not. "You speak of simple things as if they were rich. I suppose they are." He held Ned's look for a heartbeat. "You are not what I expected when I wrote my first letters to the River Lords," he said. "I thought I would coax a cold lord into warm air. I have gotten instead a man who freezes me where I stand and yet makes me grateful for chills." "You are what I expected," Ned said, "except that you are less frivolous now that you have nearly died." Renly rose, then stopped at the door. "Do you truly forgive Stannis?" "I forgive the man who almost let the Red Woman turn him into a murderer before dawn hit his face," Ned said. "Forgiving is not forgetting. There is a ledger where such things are written. The realm can carry a few names there and still be called healthy." The Great Council met in the Sept because the throne room felt like a place where arguments went to rot. The mother's smile looked down from glass, and the warrior's sternness promised little peace. Lords declared by the reading of names. Maesters recorded votes that made quills squeak. Septons prayed blessings that made hard men blink. unaccustomed to being invited to mercy. When the count was done, Stannis was hailed with the weight of custom. He stood in that weight as men stand in armor not yet broken in, and did not bend. Renly stepped forward and put his hand to Stannis's shoulder. The hall shifted, like a horse that had been trained to shy. "I stand for the realm," Stannis said. "I am the realm's servant and no gods. Dragons come again in stories, and priests come again in colors, and men gild lies with silk. We will count ships. We will mend roads. We will keep the peace with honest swords." He looked at Ned. "If a hand can be found who says no to me when I am wrong and yes to me when I am only disliked, I will have him." The murmuring in the hall became something else. Men looked at Mace Tyrell and saw a man who would nod. They looked at Jersey's weeping ladies and saw no help. They looked at Renly and saw a man who would say yes too often for love. They looked at Ned and saw a man who would say no whenever no was the thing that would cost him sleep. "I am a poor courtier," Ned said. "I will be a poorer king's friend. I will likely offend lords whose favor we would better keep. I will choose the wrong word at dinner. If you can abide that, I will serve until the realm lets me go north and die among trees that remember my name." Stannis's mouth moved in what might have been the shadow of a smile. "Done," he said. There was no cheer then, only the scrape of chairs and the low thunder of 100 men standing at once because standing is easier than thought. The realm turned not as a wheel turns, smooth on an axle, but as a cart with a broken spoke might turn, jerking, complaining, and at last pointing its nose along a road that was at least a road. In the days that followed, Ned sent Sansa north with a guard that had nothing to do with pageantry. Dour men with wind-burnt faces and simple eyes. The Hound did not ride with them. He had found a dark corner in the city where the fire could not look at him and was counting his breath to make sure it kept count. Arya was already on her road and would not be caught by letters. Robb held the trident with a surety that made old lords remember old songs and change the names in them. Catelyn waited at Riverrun with a grace that would have made queens ashamed. The Iron Islands had taken their chance, as iron always does. There would be work there. In the east, beyond the sweet reach of ravens, a girl walked with dragons in a land that did not dress itself in Westerosi forms. Men spoke of her as they speak of storms that are a season away, often inaccurately, with a thrill that admits fear. Melisandre remained in a cell that looked into the courtyard of Storm's End's inner ward where the sun came like a priest late to prayers. She smiled when Ned visited, not as a captive smiles, but as a woman who knows a thing you do not. "Light is not the same as good," she told him. "Dark is not the same as evil. You will learn this when you must. I have learned that men put their sins in God's mouths when those sins taste sweet on their own tongues," Ned said. "You think yourself honest because you do not lie to your God," she murmured. "Try not to lie to your need." He left her there, because sometimes the mercy is to let a voice not persuade the unwary. Davos went often to see her, and came away quieter each time, and then busied himself with the counting of ships in a manner that made the counting itself into a prayer. Renly and Marjorie returned to Highgarden for a time with their household and their laughter, the realm's brightness restored below vineyards and fountains. Loras rode with them and did not leave his king's side. The Reach began to turn its strength toward roads and treasuries, and songs sung in winning keys that made the new reign sound like old summer. Stannis sat the throne and asked questions about hinges and tariffs as if ballads could be coaxed into verse by good joining. He took no pleasure in the throne's press under his thighs. He simply endured it, which some said was the very definition of kingship and others said was the surest way to lose a kingdom. Ned found he could walk into the throne room without the old bitterness scalding his throat and tell the king that his counselors were wrong when they were and that he was wrong when he was. They fought in words like smiths who respect the good metal in each other's hammers. Autumn was coming. The smell of it lay on the city like a piece of clean linen laid on a fevered brow. The Seven and the old gods both seemed tired of men misusing them and inclined to watch with a weary patience that had killed kings before. One evening Ned climbed the steps of the Hands Tower alone. Wind moved through the city's alleys, carrying cooking smells and market noise and the iron rasp of 1,000 small labors. He stood in the highest room and looked east where the sea lay like a plate made by a poor smith but still beloved because of the dinners eaten on it. He thought of the boy he had been and the men he had killed, of the children he had made and the children he had not saved, of winter and its honest malice. He thought of Renly's laughter and Stannis's jaw, of Davos's hands and Brienne's stubborn gait, of Tyrion's wounded eye measuring the world and finding it in need of trimming. He thought about shadows and the light that had driven one back. When the door opened, he did not turn at once. He knew the footfall. "You never did like the South," Stannis said. "I like it better when the wind smells of rain," Ned said. Stannis came and stood beside him with all the ease of a sword leaning against a table. They watched the city go about its business without their help. That is how most cities prefer their kings to behave. "There will be rebellions," Stannis said. "There will be men who think they can use my dislike of charm as a weapon against me. There will be men who think my brother is an easier king and will ask him to be it again." "There will," Ned said. "You will tell me not to use a knife where a cord will do." "I will. You will say that some mercy costs less than the grudges that replace it." "I will," Stannis grunted. "I will not thank you. You will not want me to. There is work." "There is," Ned said. They stood a while, two men who had once saved a castle and then later saved a city, neither of them entirely suited to a world that asked for songs. Both of them stubborn enough to endure the world's lack of taste. The last light went down in the west with humility, and the first stars came and declared themselves with confidence men rarely manage. Ned thought of the gods wood at Winterfell and of the white bark and the red leaves and the face carved in the trunk that seemed to him sometimes more patient than kind and other times more kind than patient. He breathed and let the South's air in and would not call it a sin. When he went down, he found a raven waiting with a northern sigil and a note in a hand he recognized. Robb's. It spoke of victories and stubborn rivers and of a boy made hard too soon. It asked for counsel and got it, though letters are poor fathers. It ended with 3 words that broke him like waves break rocks and leave the rocks you always knew beneath. Come when you can. He would. But for now, the realm slept like a jangled harp that had at last fallen still. In Storm's End, a woman in red stared at a square of sky that was not hers. In Highgarden, a queen that was not yet a queen walked among flowers and thought about new plans. In Dragonstone, a girl read letters at a table with a grim father and thought of nights she did not like. On the Dothraki Sea, which is no sea at all, a young woman with 3 small fires on her shoulders taught herself to be alone with no one to forgive her mistakes. And in King's Landing, where the wind now and then remembered to blow from the sea and not from the vaults, Eddard Stark did what he had always done best. He chose the more difficult thing, the thing least likely to please any party at dinner, and he did it long enough that doing it became the realm's habit. Winter would come. It always does. Against it stood men and women with poor tools and decent hearts and names that would be entered into ledgers by hands that would not always spell them right. Against it stood truth, which is a cold fire and burns as long as someone fed it wood. Against it stood a house with old stones and a vow never to bend. And out beyond all counting, the sea went on shouldering at the land, and Storm's End shouldered back, and it was enough for one season, which is all the gods ever permit. Some nights Ned woke with the taste of salt and smoke in his mouth and his hands clenched hard enough to ache, and he would rise and go to the window and look east until the sky admitted dawn. On such a morning he remembered a tent torn open to the rain, and a woman in blue dragging a brazier where no lady would, and a shadow that had a man's face, and learned that even shadows can be taught fear by light. He smiled then, briefly and ungainly, the way a man smiles who does not practice it, and went down to meet the day with the stubborn patience of old stones that have agreed to shelter newer roofs. The realm did not break. That was not nothing. In a world where every choice taught men how to be worse, a few better choices had managed to teach a few more. The gates in the city did not open for murderers at dawn. They opened for bakers and for fishermen. The court still lied because courts do, but it lied less often about the sort of things that make graves. The hand grew more disliked by the sort of men whose dislike is a recommendation. The king grew more respected by the sort of men who hate being asked to pay their taxes. And in the streets children played a game where 2 boys made antlers with their fingers, and another boy scowled and counted and told them when to stop. Years later, an old soldier would tell a frightened girl the story of the night when a shadow came to a king's tent and found a storm where it had expected sleeping. He would say it softly, not to scare her, but to remind her that even things men do not believe in can be opposed by things they do. Courage, stubbornness, the good sense to drag a fire into the path of fear. He would say the king in that story was saved because an honest man had learned to be careful and a careful man had learned to be brave, and because a woman had lifted something heavy when no man had hands free for it. The girl would not remember the names. She would remember the fire. So the tale passed into alleys and kitchens and garrisons. Bards never loved it much. It lacked a clear villain and an easy tune. But mothers told it to sons who wanted swords for the wrong reasons, and old men told it to each other when snow fell and they were grateful for roofs. The throne rusted a little less. The north remembered to send grain south when the harvest was good. The Reach discovered that poems for the honest prosper longest. The Storm Lords repaired a postern gate and said nothing about why they checked it twice. And the sea, relentless teacher, kept on, because seas never take a lesson and never think they should. It threw itself at storm's end with its old fury, and the walls shouldered it aside, and men stood on those walls and ate their bread and counted their loaves, and the realm made itself ready for whatever the wind would bring next.